This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
Oh, what a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
I'm going to do what I feel is the best interest of the football team, and we cannot turn the ball over. We cannot have 8 sacks. We cannot put our defense on the short side of the field as an offense. We have to execute better on 4th down. We have a guy open. We don't execute the protection. We drop a pass on another 4th down in the game. So there's all kinds of things that we can point the finger at. I can do a better job.
Doug Pederson earlier today, you heard it on the Sports Bash with Mike Hunter Brody, the Pederson presser. Well, that's Doug doing his best Andy Reid impersonation. I got to do better. We can't do this stuff. I can't allow sacks. We can't throw interceptions. I got to be better. The team's got to do better. That's really what I just heard right there. For all of Pederson's great strengths, he still has these flaws. And among those flaws is that he and his quarterback are both stubborn. And guess what? When you're stubborn, it comes back to bite you. And it came back to bite the Eagles yesterday. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, 97.3 ESPN mobile app. We're leading you up to Monday Night Football double header. Steelers, Giants, Game 1. Titans, Broncos, Game 2. You hear all the action coming up at 7 p.m. right here on 97.3 ESPN. At 6:20 tonight, we're going to have Gary Myers, longtime NFL writer, author of New York Times bestseller, How About Them Cowboys? Also the New York Times bestseller, Brady versus Manning. He's also a Pro Football Hall of Fame voter, so we'll get his insights on NFL Week 1. I want to know from him, Aaron Donald is the best defensive player he has seen since who? Because, dude, Aaron Donald's incredible. That dude was just wrecking havoc. And you know what? Maybe the Rams are as good as we were told they were on Hard Knocks. I asked the question over the weekend, are all those cut-up clips on Hard Knocks making the Rams look better than they are? Are the Rams actually that good? Oh, the Rams are actually that good. Saw that last night. So we got a lot to get to this hour. Only an hour to get to it. PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board is open. 609-403-0973. 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. And I had to open the Doug Pederson cup because I don't think Doug is willing, and I'm not saying he can't, but he's not willing to admit at times that he was wrong about something. And it's the same problem with his quarterback. All of you out there know that I've been a Carson Wentz guy since he was in college. When he was coming out of the draft, I was so high on this guy. I was so not high on Jared Goff. But Jared Goff did something specifically last night on Sunday Night Football that Carson Wentz was unable to do yesterday. Goff was able to read the environment. Jared Goff understood that his offensive line is not elite. He understood he was going up against Alden Smith, who looked pretty good last night in his return. Everson Griffin, DeMarcus Lawrence. He had some beasts coming after him. Even the guy who replaced Leighton Vander Esch, Thomas, he had a couple quarterback pressures as well. But what did Goff do, and what did the Rams do to compensate for that? They did the same thing the Cowboys were trying to do to mitigate and slow down. They couldn't stop him, but slow down Aaron Donald in that Rams defense. They were getting the ball out of their hands quickly. They were trying to hit the bubble screens and the slant routes and the sluggos. They were trying to do misdirections. They were trying to get the ball out of his hands. They even showed it on Sunday Football about how, look at Goff, every pass that he had that was under 2.5 seconds, I think the stat said he was 10 for 13 on those. He was incredible on those moments. And he showcased why he was the first overall pick in that draft ahead of Wentz. And Wentz showcased why he was the number 2 pick yesterday as well. In the first half, Wentz looked great. 2 touchdowns, getting away from pressure, understanding the field, moving around when he needed to in the pocket. Wentz was really good for one half of football. And then he threw that interception, and everything just fell apart. And Wentz showed you why he is who he is. Carson Wentz is stubborn, and his head coach is stubborn. Wentz refused to make certain plays and certain throws. You want to know why he went 8 for 21 and 2 interceptions after his hot start? Because there were moments in the game where Wentz just held on to the ball and held on to the ball. He was so insistent on going with the deep ball. He was so insistent on making the big play that he refused to make the right play. And that is going to be the flaw of this Eagles team from now until as long as Wentz and Pederson are here. Wentz and Pederson have this tendency to be stubborn. They don't want to hear that they might be making a mistake. Now, they'll tell you, I got to do a better job. I was wrong. I didn't have a good game. They'll take accountability for a bad game. But when you point out to them certain things, they don't want to hear it. Doug Pederson was asked today, and I'm not going to play that cut because of the fact that the answer was so long-winded, it's unnecessary. But Doug said, he was asked basically in a backwards way, why didn't you run the ball? And Doug's explanation was just a circular reasoning explanation. I'll tell you why the Eagles didn't run the ball more yesterday. Because when Boston Scott went out, they had one running back left, and that was Corey Clement. Doug could have just answered with that, but he didn't. Because he's been asked so many times about this run-to-pass ratio issue that he almost takes it as a personal affront to him. And in some ways, it kind of is. Because remember, after the Kansas City game, when the Eagles lost to the Chiefs back a couple years ago, it took the players going to Doug and saying, we need to run the ball more, Doug. And Doug listened to them. There have been reports that it was Frank Reich in Doug's ear advising him to do certain things in the past. And the assumption was, now in 2020, now that he has more experienced voices in his coach's room, like Marty Morningweg and Rich Scangarello, that those guys would be able to give Doug better advice. We're going to find out how much Doug is willing to listen, how much he's willing to be flexible, how much he's willing to be adaptive to his environment. And his environment is, you don't know what you're going to get from this team moving forward because some of these injuries are just coming out of nowhere. We don't know what Driscoll's status is. We know that Vinny Curry is going to miss a couple weeks. You heard that from Jeff Mosher earlier today on Football at 4. We know that Craig James, your primary backup outside corner, he's going to miss time. We know that Lane Johnson may or may not play next week. We don't know is affirmatively, is Nate Herbig going to be the starting right guard? It sounded like Doug wasn't going to fully commit to that. But what we do know is that Doug has to have somebody tell him, or he has to realize that the way they went about that game was stubborn. They didn't adapt to the situation in front of them. Because when Washington started catching up, partly because of the turnovers, but partly also because of poor play calling, the Eagles weren't just controlling the game in the first half. They were borderline dominating it on both sides of the ball. You don't have to run the ball every time to control the clock. You can do a little slant here, a bubble screen there, little crossing routes. The part of the West Coast offense that Doug and Andy Reid come from talks about how you use the short passing game as a version of the run game. This is something that Josh McDaniels did for years in New England. This is something that Kyle Shanahan has done with Jimmy Garoppolo that got them to the Super Bowl. It's something that Alex Smith did for years with Andy Reid in Kansas City before they drafted Patrick Mahomes. This is a staple of the West Coast offense. And I didn't see it at all from the Eagles yesterday. I assumed that, well, Driscoll and Herbig are playing, and that means the Eagles are going to go with more misdirection and slants and quick-hitting offense to make up for the fact that they have these young guys in there. And instead, the head coach and the quarterback are both going out there and saying, we are going to play this game as if the players who the young guys are filling in for are still here. You cannot go against Washington this past week or the Rams next week, or in fact any team on your schedule, and act like you have your full complement of players. You can have faith in your guys all you want. And I understand that there is a level of, we saw the guy execute this in practice. He should be able to do it in the game. But we saw what happened. John Hightower was supposed to do a bubble screen. He drops the ball. We saw that they had multiple opportunities to have space underneath for crossing routes. And when they did run the crossing routes, like with Greg Ward, Wentz hit him and they got a first down. But then they got away from it. The stubbornness of this head coach and this quarterback is going to make or break this team. And the sooner they become more flexible and make better decisions in the moment, the Eagles will have a chance to win a Super Bowl. Here's Doug Pederson on trying to work with Wentz on making these better decisions. All right, well, Doug was there, and now he's not, so we'll try to pull that cut up for you a little bit later. But the point is that this is the 5th year for Carson Wentz, and at some point, Wentz has to make better decisions. You can't keep looking at this young quarterback in Carson Wentz and saying, well, he's going to turn it around at some point. No, at some point, he's not going to turn it around. At some point, either this is what he is or he just can't do certain things. And I don't believe for 1 minute that Carson Wentz isn't capable of playing a different style of game and adapting to a situation, because we saw him do it in December when he looked great, when he was carrying that team and leading them to the playoffs. So we know that he can do this. But for whatever reason, Wentz insists on doing it differently. All right, here's Doug on the point about Wentz.
We still have to continue to address him, to address those issues. You know, it's part of the football game. It's, you know, we just got to keep talking that it's okay to throw the ball away. It's okay to dirt the ball on a screen pass or something of that nature. And look, it's something that we just got to continue working through. You know, there is a fine line, obviously, as we know, between the aggressiveness, but at the same time, we want to be smart.
You heard Doug say all the right things there. But at what point is it in year 5, is Carson going to actually listen? You know, listen to what the coach is telling him? And I've been arguing with you guys for months and forever, okay? I'm a Wentz guy, and I think Wentz has more talent than Goff and Prescott. He has a higher ceiling. But if he's going to continue to be stubborn, and his head coach is going to continue to be stubborn in their play calling, this team is not going to win a Super Bowl. If a team is offering you a way to beat them, and you ignore that opportunity, at least to even try, at least try to run the bubble screen with Jalen Reagor. They didn't even try it. Try more crossing routes. Try more sluggos. Try more comeback routes. Try different things. Instead, the Eagles' offense became predictable, and they shot themselves in the foot. Meanwhile, I'm watching other quarterbacks around the NFL, like Joe Burrow and Jared Goff and Dak Prescott. I'm seeing other quarterbacks like Josh Allen, who is much more raw than Carson Wentz is at this point in their careers. I'm seeing other quarterbacks do what Carson Wentz refused to do. It's not that Wentz can't do it, it's that he's choosing not to do it. And that is what is so exasperating about the Eagles' loss to Washington yesterday. Game night here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig hanging out with you, leading you up to the Monday football doubleheader. Game night being brought to you by GMS Law. Make the right call with 4 convenient locations to serve you. Visit them online at gmslaw.com. PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open at 609-403-0973. We'll get to your text just a little bit later in the show, but coming up next, we'll talk more NFL with Gary Myers, Pro Football Hall of Fame writer, New York Times best-selling author, coming up next here on Game Night. I'm Josh Hennig, and this is 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Counting you down to Monday Night Football, doubleheader, top of the hour. Steelers versus Giants, and then Titans versus Broncos. Doubleheader right here on 97.3 ESPN. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Game Night, and joining us right now on the Boardwalk kind of hotline, New York Times bestseller, some excellent books such as How About Them Cowboys, as well as Brady versus Manning. Also, he's a Pro Football Hall of Fame voter. He is Gary Myers, and he joins us here on 97.3 ESPN. Gary, how you doing on this Monday?
I'm doing great, Josh. How you doing tonight?
Doing pretty good. You know, I always love your insights on the NFL because, you know, because of your experience, because of the things that you've seen, the people you've talked to, you have these great insights. And I got to start off before we get into anything else. I got to know, Aaron Donald is the best defensive player you've seen in the NFL since who?
Wow. I would say since Lawrence Taylor and Reggie White. How's that?
I think that's very appropriate because I'm
now, obviously much different type players. I mean, right. Lawrence was just a complete dominant force as a pass rusher, and Reggie as well, where Aaron Donald is just, he can dominate the game in different ways just by his mere presence. Much different players, but I would, off the top of my head, when you ask me that question, I just go back to the two best defensive players that I've seen, during the years that I've covered the league, and those are those two guys. And I think that Aaron Donald, he's a step below, but just to be on the second level behind those two guys is pretty good.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that he's only 29 years old says that he still has years to go in his career, which is amazing because I remember coming out of college, people were like, oh, well, he might not be big enough to play, the D tackle position. I think he's really shown that, he is by far the best defensive player because I'm watching the game last night. I see him driving guys backwards. I mean, he literally right hooked the guy in the chest to get him off of him to go after the quarterback. I mean, he does things that are just so creative that I think that you going back to Reggie and to Lawrence is really appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, to dominate like he does from the middle of the defense, where he's not, a pass rush specialist, but, still gets so much push up the middle that, he can disrupt an offense from there. I mean, that's really special. There haven't been a lot of guys like that. Randy White was kind of like that, but I think Aaron Donald is more disruptive than Randy was. And, certainly there's been, John Randall was, a force up the middle. And, there's been a lot of players over the years, but this guy really stands out. And he plays hard all the time, which is, it's not easy to do when you're getting doubled, probably on every play and sometimes tripled by the two guards in the center. And, he's just a great player.
I want to get your perspective also on Sunday Football. We saw, two of the three big names from the 2016 NFL Draft, the quarterbacks going head to head, Jared Goff and Dak Prescott. I think they both had their moments last night. But I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was it was very apparent to me, Gary, that when you're watching Goff and you're watching Prescott, it's just impressive how far both of them have come from their starting point when they got to the NFL.
Yeah, if you remember I believe Hard Knocks did Goff's rookie year, and he was just a mess in training camp and in the preseason games that summer. And even when he came in at the end of his rookie year, when Jeff Fisher was still the coach, you really wondered if the Rams blew it. But then when Sean McVay got there, he's continually improved. He had a bad Super Bowl against the Patriots, but, Belichick can do that to anybody. And I think he's much more under control now. And McVay, it plays to his strengths, having him roll out a bunch. And I don't think he's an elite player. And I don't think Dak Prescott is an elite player. Again, I put them on the second level of quarterbacks. It's just amazing how much these guys are getting paid. I think it would have done a lot for Prescott's reputation and his desire to get, the money that he wants if he had been able to take the Cowboys down the field there at the end and at least get the game into overtime. I know there was that questionable offensive pass interference call against Michael Gallup. It was a beautiful throw. I didn't think it was pass interference, but I just think it would have done a lot for Prescott to produce in that situation. Cowboys lost a lot of one-score games last year, and then they started off, last night, the offense, with all the talent they have on offense, they just don't produce enough points.
You mentioned the talent. How surprised were you that they didn't find more ways to get the ball to a guy like CeeDee Lamb, a guy who, when you watched him in college, he was a guy who was used in a multitude of different ways in that Oklahoma offense?
Yeah, you have to, Josh, you got to take into consideration there was no off season. There was a month of training camp. They couldn't get in pads for the first couple of weeks, and there was no preseason games. So I think that every team is a work in progress, and the ones that are really well coached, played well yesterday, like Seattle and Baltimore. Baltimore is just really well coached, and Pete Carroll's a terrific coach, other than that one call in the Super Bowl a few years ago. I think that the teams, and then Belichick, obviously, with so many players opting out and then starting over with a new quarterback for them. And they didn't play great yesterday, but, for them to at least win as they try to get better, it gives them something to build on. That's a long way of saying that it gives CeeDee Lamb time here. He hasn't had much time with Prescott, and you can just tell watching this guy that he's going to be great. I think he's going to be great on the fade passes in the end zone. I think he's going to be terrific on jump balls along the sideline. And it looks like, he's got enough speed there for sure, to be a deep threat. I think he's going to be a great player. And they'll learn more about him as the season goes on. And, the one thing you can't do in an NFL season is overreact every Monday to what happened the day before, whether it's the first week of the season or the 8th week. When you get to about the 12th week, that's when things really start to take form about what you can expect down the stretch.
Gary Myers joining us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow him on Twitter at Gary Myers NY. Of course, he's the author of great books such as How About Them Cowboys and Brady versus Manning. I recommend both of them very highly myself. Gary, speaking of the quarterbacks, we mentioned Prescott, we mentioned Goff. I want to know what your thoughts are on Wentz, because the biggest thing that stood out to me from yesterday's games was while Prescott and Goff were aware of, I'm facing a defense that's coming at me, I felt like Carson Wentz was much more stubborn, and it's a little frustrating for a lot of Eagle fans that this guy is in his 5th year and he still has these tendencies. Do you think that, where guys like you mentioned Prescott and Goff not being elite or second-tier talent, is that basically where Wentz is as well?
I don't think he's taken any steps forward since his terrific second year when he got hurt towards the end and the Eagles won the Super Bowl. There are times that he's definitely looking like he's taken a step backwards. Getting sacked 8 times, you just can't let that happen. Blowing a 17-0 lead to a team that, I think is going to be one of the worst in the league. To lose a game like that, I think it's really disheartening. Again, I don't want to overreact like I just said a couple minutes ago, but the Eagles opening in Washington with no fans in the stands. Not that there's a lot of fans there, anyhow, and then being up 17-0 and losing the game, and the quarterback hitting the ground so much. I think that's a really discouraging way to start the season. And Wentz has just got to be better than that. I know, Washington has so many first-round picks on the defensive line. It looks like Chase Young's going to be a terrific player, but you got to find a way to get rid of the ball. You just can't be getting sacked 8 times.
You mentioned about, getting sacked all those times. How much credit is also on Washington's coaching staff? We know that everywhere Jack Del Rio goes, that first year, whether it was Carolina or Jacksonville or Denver or Oakland, those defenses seem to take a step up in that first year. So how much credit do we also give to Del Rio and Rivera for that game yesterday?
Well, those are 2 pretty good defensive coaches right there. They've been around the league for a long time. But, don't forget, without Lane Johnson playing yesterday, he's their best offensive lineman. So you take a tackle away from any team, starting tackle away from any team, and good defensive coaches are going to find a way to exploit that. So, again, you can't read too much into it in terms of you can't take short-term results and try to project them into long-term, what's going to happen. I think that's really dangerous, especially after 1 week. I just think you have to identify what the weaknesses are and then, see if you can fix them. And then after 2-3 weeks, if the same things are happening, then you have a problem. But I certainly didn't think that the Eagles were going to lose yesterday. And when it was 17-0, here in New York, we had the Jets game and the Eagles game on at the same time. And I admit, I watched the entire Jets game, and I was just kind of flipping during the commercials to see what the Eagles were doing. So I wasn't really aware of the ebb and flow of that game and, what the turning point was, other than, hearing that, the Redskins defensive line just completely dominated the Eagles, especially, in the second half when the game changed. And I going into this thing, I just didn't look at the Eagles. I don't think I picked them to even make the playoffs. I'm just not impressed with, the players I have at the skill positions.
Gary, you mentioned a little bit ago about the no fans being in the stands. Obviously, the only game it did was the Colts-Jags game. What was your biggest takeaway from the players, in the environment without those fans in the stands?
That's a great question, and it's the biggest question I had going into this. With the TV piping and crowd noise and not going to many shots of the stadium being empty, you can almost talk yourself into that this seems normal, right? I mean, you're watching the game, you're hearing the crowd noise. For the most part, it's appropriate after what's happened on the field. So the biggest question I had was the motivation and the intensity of the players who were there, and they obviously know, there's no fans in the stands, and I think the decibel level of the piped-in noise in the stadium is either at 70 or 75, and I'm not an expert on these things, but like a loud crowd noise is around 100 or 105. So it's more like background noise than crowd noise. And one of the quotes that I heard from Tom Brady after their game yesterday was it kind of felt like a scrimmage to him. And that was my concern going in, is it would have the feel of a scrimmage. Would it also only have the intensity of a scrimmage? And I didn't see a lot of that yesterday. I thought for the most part, the games were fairly well played, but it's hard to get inside the heads of the players. And maybe they have to do a psych job on themselves, saying, okay, there's nobody here. It feels like a training camp practice. And even a lot of training camp practices before this year had a lot of fans there. So it just feels different. And I think they really need to be mentally tough to block that out and play as hard as they would if there were fans in the stands. Because let's face it, there is a home field advantage in the NFL. And the home team fans, as long as the team is playing well, can provide a lot of motivation with their enthusiasm and their energy, and that's just completely missing now.
Gary, one more before I let you go, and always appreciate your time again, folks. Follow Gary on Twitter at Gary Myers NY. Check out his books, How About Them Cowboys and Brady versus Manning. I highly recommend both of them. They were part of my reading list over the last couple of years. Gary, was there anything that happened on Sunday yesterday that you could point to and say, that kind of, shall I say, cemented an opinion that you had about a team or a player heading into this season, or maybe, made you kind of like, look back and say, I didn't expect that at all?
Well, I thought the Ravens were going to be really good. In fact, I picked them to win the Super Bowl. And Lamar Jackson looks like he picked up where he left off, if we don't think about the Tennessee playoff game, but pretty much how he played all year and being a unanimous MVP. So I did expect that. I picked Seattle to get there in the NFC. So going down to Atlanta and having Russell Wilson play as well as he did, and then Jamal Adams, immediately making an impact on the Seattle defense, I think they're going to be really tough. On the flip side of the Ravens being so good, I'm surprised that the Browns weren't more competitive yesterday in Baltimore. They have a lot of talent on that team, but obviously something is missing, and they'll probably go through coaches every 2 years until they can finally find somebody to draw it out of, Baker Mayfield. Kansas City, to me, right now has, the most talent in the league, and until somebody knocks them off, everybody's picking them to repeat. I hate doing that. Something always happens to the champion where they can't repeat. It hasn't happened since the 03-04 Patriots, but Patrick Mahomes right now clearly is the best player in the league, and I'll just be interested to see if they can sustain the success that they had last year.
He's Gary Myers.
The other thing I'll just throw in there is I was really taken aback by how bad the Jets were yesterday. I know they don't have a ton of talent, especially on offense, but it looked like they just went from last season to yesterday with no training camp, no meetings, no nothing in between. I mean, they were that disorganized, and I mean, what they put on the field yesterday was a disgrace. And if Josh Allen doesn't fumble twice in the red zone, the Jets would have lost by like 30 or 35 points. So I was surprised they were so bad.
Really quick then on the Jets before I let you go, is it just fair to say that, Adam Gase, the clock is ticking at this point, considering you got a new GM and the overall opinion of him around the city?
Well, around the city, they wanted him fired like 3 days ago or 3 months ago. He and Joe Douglas worked together in Chicago for 1 year and apparently developed a pretty good friendship. And I know that Gase was very instrumental in Douglas becoming the general manager here last June, 6 months after Gase was hired as the coach. And Douglas was given the security, with a 6-year contract. And I know the people down in your part of Jersey know about him because he was with the Eagles and he was very instrumental in some of their draft picks. But I have to assume he's a bright guy, and whatever friendship he has with Adam Gase is not going to get in the way of him doing what's right for the Jets. Now, both he and Gase report independently to Christopher Johnson, so Douglas cannot by himself unilaterally fire Gase, but he can certainly go to Chris Johnson after the season or in the middle of the season if the thing really goes in the toilet and says, we got to change coaches. The team isn't responding. Again, whether this is November 1st or January 1st, if what the Jets put on the field yesterday is what the Jets are all about this year, then there's no doubt in my mind that Adam Gase will be fired at the end of the year.
He's Gary Myers. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Gary Myers NY, Pro Football Hall of Fame voter, also author of some great books like How About Them Cowboys and Brady versus Manning. As all guests, he appeared today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Gary, always appreciate the time and the insights.
Anytime, Josh. Have a good night.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get to your text on the PlaySugarHouse.com text board at 609-403-0973 right here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Counting you down to Monday Night Football doubleheader. Coming up top of the hour, Steelers versus Giants, and then Titans versus Broncos. Listen, I'm really looking forward to both these games because I want to see what Ben Roethlisberger looks like when he comes back. I was talking with Andy Benoit about this on Friday. You know, we see a lot of pitchers. They come back from the Roethlisberger surgery. They're as good, if not better, than they were before. I want to see what does Roethlisberger's arm look like coming back from this injury. And then I want to see, you know, what do the Giants look like? Because it's the second year for Daniel Jones, first year coach Joe Judge. Jason Garrett is now roaming the sidelines. Well, not the sidelines, probably up in the press box. But he's the offense coordinator for the Giants. You know, what does all this look like over there for the G-Man? And then the second game, second year for Drew Lock and the Broncos. No Von Miller. How is that going to impact the game? You saw Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry both get huge contracts this offseason. Did they play as well as they did last year, or did they make their money and they're content? I mean, wouldn't that actually be a great brawl? If I could pick two head coaches to just throw down, Joe Judge versus Matt Vrabel, those are two guys I would love to see throw down. Not because I really think they'd be a good fight, but because I think they're both so stubbornly hard-headed and tough guys that they would probably just beat the snot out of each other, and just one of them would just have to just collapse in order for someone to lose. It would be like watching one of those fights from like the early 90s with the UFC when they had those random guys getting sanctioned for fights when they shouldn't have been sanctioned. Let's get to your text board messages right now. PlaySugarHouse.com, text board 609-403-0973. Angel in Violent chimes in and says, Wentz is an all-or-nothing player. He's always looking for the home run, never dumping it to his running back. Well, Angel, you're right. He has a tendency to be an all-or-nothing player, but we did see him dump it to the running back last year. Miles Sanders was third on the team in receiving yards and receptions last year. Also, Boston Scott. Remember the Giants game. So we know he can, and we know he has done it. But you're right, because he's an all-or-nothing guy, because he wants to make the big play, because he grew up idolizing Brett Favre, he wants to be a big play guy. He wants to make these big, splashy throws and plays because he knows he has the arm strength for it. Well, just because you have the ability to do something doesn't mean it's always the smartest thing to do. And I just don't think Wentz understands that sometimes. I think he's just so stinking stubborn about it. Angel and Violent, appreciate the text message. Let's get another one here. 609-403-0973. Joey D. and Ventnor chimes in and says, Josh, I was pretty accurate about my prediction for the game. Eagles will go up. Washington tied it late. Unfortunately, there was no game-winning drive by Wentz. It was hard to watch them go into a shell. That's from Joey D. and Ventnor. It's more than going into the shell, Joey D. It's the fact that those of us who are sitting, watching the game, play for play, down for down, or if you're like me, you got the remote in your hand, you're pausing and rewinding it while the game's going on. You're sitting there watching the game and you're saying, why did this happen? Why are you holding the ball? You know, the insistence on the team for the final, 1.5 quarters of the game to do nothing creative, nothing extraordinary, nothing out of the box, nothing that really changed their opportunities to win the game was incredibly frustrating. And I can't blame it all on the injuries because that's way too easy. I said this on Twitter last night. A lot of people are going to point to the injuries. I can't do it. I can't do it for this game. The best coaches and the best quarterbacks adapt to their situation and make the best of that situation. And I felt like Wentz and Pederson yesterday failed to do that. They failed to adapt. They failed to adjust. They failed to evolve. And they were so intent on doing things a certain way that they just wouldn't let go of the game plan, I guess, is what they were hanging on to. Listen, the best coaches in the world adapt. Even Andy Reid, he gets running backs. He starts running the ball. That tells you something. It tells you that even Andy Reid is willing to be flexible for a guy who loves to pass the ball as much as he does. BlazeSugarHouse.com text board is open 609-403-0973. Another texter chimes in and says the fact the Eagles think Carson Wentz is and was an elite is step one of the problem. He has not proven worthy of a title as an elite quarterback. The money is outrageous what he got paid, and he is still stubborn. Well, let's break that down. First of all, if you really want to be honest, all athletes, what they get paid is outrageous, okay? To pin that all on Wentz is pretty narrow-minded and cheap on your part, all right? Wentz is not even one of the highest-paid quarterbacks in the league anymore. He's been passed by a bunch of these guys. I mean, Pat Mahomes is making more money. It's a chance to make more money potentially than Bryce Harper does, okay? Think about that just for a hot second. Bryce Harper signed a over $300 million contract, and Pat Mahomes, if he fulfills all the parts in his contract, can make up to $500 million. It's just insane. Is he really worth all that money, Pat Mahomes? He's just a quarterback. The quarterback may be the most important position on the field, but the offensive line isn't blocked, and the receivers don't catch, and Andy Reid isn't his coach. Is Pat Mahomes winning Super Bowls and having a chance to win and be as great as he is year after year? I don't know the answer to that. I tend to say no, just because great players are not great without other great people around them. So you can point to Wentz and the money all you want, but there's a ton of quarterbacks who make a ton of money in this league. Jared Goff has a gargantuan contract. Jimmy Garoppolo has a massive contract. Matthew Stafford is getting paid ridiculous money. You act like Wentz is the highest paid guy in the league. He's not. I think that you can complain about the money he's getting paid is completely short-sighted, narrow-minded, and lacking context. Now, you mentioned about the Eagles and their fans thinking Wentz is elite. I think that there's two sides to that coin, because for every person I run into who thinks Wentz is great, I run into another person who's an Eagles fan who says that the Eagles should have kept Nick Foles and Carson Wentz should have been the guy who was sent out of town. And honestly, if you think Wentz is a top 5 quarterback or if you think the Eagles should have kept Nick Foles, you're both wrong. You're both being irrational. So it's not that Wentz being elite is the problem, because I've talked to multiple people, and I've heard multiple people bring this up over the years. You know, whether it's a guy like Andy Benoit who watches film, he talked about it on Friday. Whether it's a guy like Emery Hunt who studies film, and he played college football, he talked about it. I've heard Greg Cosell on the Inside the Birds podcast with Jeff Mosher and Adam Kaplan. Of course, Jeff Mosher will be back on the Sports Bash this Wednesday for football at 4. I've heard tons of people who study film. I think it was oh my goodness, who was on the Sports Bash? I think it was last year or the year before. It was Jordan Palmer came on with Mike Gill on the Sports Bash a couple of years ago. I believe that was the Minnesota Super Bowl. And he mentioned about Carson Wentz's elite talent. They all say the same thing. Every person I've heard evaluate him say he has elite talent. He has the most raw talent of any quarterback drafted in 2016 class. He has the ability to be one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. So he has ability, Texter. Just because people acknowledge that doesn't make them wrong. Yes, he hasn't proven himself to be an elite quarterback yet. But to get on Eagle fans and the Eagles organization for treating him as he is elite, I don't think it's 100% fair either, because he's obviously a franchise quarterback. I don't think anybody thinks he's better than Mahomes or he's better than Russell Wilson. I hope they wouldn't think that, at least. I think most people, if they're being rational and having an honest conversation, believe that Carson Wentz is probably somewhere between 15th in the NFL and probably 8th in the NFL. I think that's a comfortable range for him because of the fact that at the end of the day, you heard Gary Myers mention it earlier, so many of these quarterbacks they're not elite quarterbacks. They're in that second tier below the elite quarterback. And so many of these quarterbacks are not the top tier, that they're the next step down. And I think that that's a fair assessment. There's not a ton of elite quarterbacks in the NFL. There never has been. There's a handful of dudes who are the best of the best, and then there's everybody else. Wentz right now is in that next tier below elite. And I agree with you, though. But you said it. He can't be called elite until he proves otherwise. But it doesn't mean you can't still win games and championships with him. If the Buccaneers can win a championship with Brad Johnson, the Ravens can win it with Trent Dilfer, well, you know what? The Eagles, they can win games with Carson Wentz. Coming up next, Monday Night Football. Giants versus Steelers, followed by Titans versus Broncos, right here on 97.3 ESPN. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Game Night. I'll catch you tomorrow.